Greetings, metaphysicians. This is episode 131, How to Center. That's what dropped in today, and some really interesting information and guidance dropped in from our angelic and higher celestial friends today. And we also go through some examples of how to center, and also we talk quite a bit about why it's important, especially in these interesting, challenging moments on the planet. Enjoy the episode.
You're listening to Let's Get Metaphysical. This podcast explores the spiritual and metaphysical world through the experiences and opinions of the host and those interviewed. It should not necessarily be seen as direct endorsement or personal advice to our listeners. We encourage you to use your own discernment, judgment, and intuition regarding anything you learn from this show.
Let's get meta.
Welcome to the Let's Get Metaphysical podcast. I'm your host, Renata Maniaci, here to remind you that you are a spiritual being having a human experience on lovely planet Earth. And it's temporary. Make the most of it. This is Season 7, Heaven on Earth, and this is episode 131, How to Center. That's what dropped in today. It's going to be the first in a series of at least 3 episodes of how-to episodes. And in no way am I claiming to be an expert on any of these topics that are coming up here, but we are currently in, and if my intuition is correct, heading into an even more interesting time on this planet in which lots of outward chaos may ensue. I don't even know what that means. I don't know what that looks like. I just know what it feels like when I am meditating and move forward a few months. It feels like a lot. And so having an episode that may help a few people to regain their sense of center feels like a good idea. And that's what's dropping in for today. So, are you ready? Let's get meta. Masters and angels, I request your presence, guidance, and support through this episode. Please help these words to be useful to all listeners on their evolutionary journey. Let me know the truth, speak the truth, become the truth, and be the truth. And please let this episode reach whoever needs to hear it. Thank you with gratitude and full faith. Bless creation. And so again, here we go on how to center. Well, first of all, what is centering? Why would we want to know how to do it? Centering, for all intents and purposes of this episode, is coming into yourself, is finding yourself in the present moment. As in not being consumed by something that is going to happen or something that already happened, or being in a stressful or reactive or just maybe not mindful moment. And so there are a few ways that I have used over the past decade to center myself. There are probably an infinite number of ways that could work for you. And I also want to tune in after sharing my ways and see if anything drops in from the guidance today. So for me, I use breathing to center myself. And in fact, I feel that most of the tools that I use for myself have to do with doing something physically as opposed to mentally. Like thinking about something, it would be something physical, like focusing on breath. Breath is a very physical sensation, and it if you can focus on that, it brings you into your body. because it reminds you that it's something that we are doing all the time, that's happening whether we're thinking about it or not. And it's just there. It's a way for us to become present in the moment. And so with this episode, in lieu of bonus content, we're just going to do some of these exercises. So I do encourage you, if you are driving or otherwise not able to do these, please don't try to. If you are operating heavy machinery, something like that. But you can always come back and do this along with us, or just take the concepts and do it on your own time if you want. But for example, let's take a moment here. I always find that it helps when I'm centering to just feel my feet on the floor, whether I'm sitting, standing, anything. So I do that, and then take a few moments and just focus on your inhale and your exhale. We're going to do this now so we can all center together. We're going to try this method of centering. And again, it doesn't have to take very long. That's one thing that's really beautiful about centering. And in the next episode, we're going to talk about grounding, another really important tool that we need to have in our toolbox that I've definitely talked about before, but I haven't done specific episodes on these topics yet. So I thought this would be good. Yeah, breathing, just focusing on your breath, even if you can do that for 30 seconds, if you can do that for a minute. Why is it called centering? I mean, one thing that's dropping in is that because it brings you to the present moment, that's kind of the center of all time. And time is interesting in our dimension. You know, we see it as linear here, and many sources tell us that, in fact, it's not linear, that all time may be happening at the same time, but we don't really see that from our perspective in this dimension or on this level. But if you can breathe and come into the present moment, that is the center on some level of all time, right then, right now. That's the center. And if you are focusing on your breathing and can do that for an increasing amount of time, then you cannot be thinking about the past or the future at that exact same moment that you are focusing on your inhale and your exhale. Another way that I have used to center is literally to center my body, my balance, to literally find my center, find my balance. And very simply, you can do that by standing and leaning forward and leaning back and leaning side to side and even moving around, right, in clockwise, counterclockwise, or different ways, but literally using your physical body to find its own center. And again, doing this kind of physical thing really brings us to the present, because we need to be present if we're moving our bodies on some level, right? And so physically just finding your center by leaning forward, backward, side to side, and having that moment of physicality and presence in your body helps us to center. Okay. So this is something you can do now. This is something you can do later. This is just one of the many ways. But in essence, centering can be synonymous with becoming present. And why? Right? Why do we need to center? Why do we need to be present? For myself, recently, I have really been trying to cut back on being any kind of reactive. And sometimes I'm successful and sometimes I'm not. I find that over time, let's say over the arc of the last decade, there's definitely been a huge improvement in that for me. definitely not perfect yet. But I find that if I can take that space in between having some kind of stimuli, whether it's words or hearing something or seeing something or whatever, and then taking a break, taking a moment, taking space in between that and whatever and however I react, that usually the reaction ends up being something that I'm more proud of. And of course, not the first person to mention this. There's a famous quote about this. And this is the basis of, I think, pretty much every anger management or, lots of different types of therapies and all kinds of things. But we're doing it here to bring it in as a practice that we can use in our daily lives, especially going into this ever increasingly uncertain moment that the planet is going through. So bringing yourself to center, bringing yourself in the body helps us to focus on exactly what we need to focus on in that moment. And what do I mean by that? I mean very much focus on what we are meant to be doing at that moment. And that includes and involves being connected to ourselves, being connected to our soul, our higher self, that self that understands everything that is happening, that self that is all-knowing and does have all the skills and abilities that we need to make it through this incarnation. And also that higher level of guidance that we talk about so often on this show, whether you see that and experience that as your guides, as source, God, masters, ascended masters, angels, etc. Okay. Very difficult, and I could potentially say impossible to do that when we are not present, when we're not here in the moment, when you're focusing on the future or past. Okay, so centering has all of these amazing benefits, and that it brings us into the moment. It brings us back into our body. Just that act helps us to be able to connect with our deeper knowing, our higher knowing, and our outside sources of knowing. Okay, all of those things is just becomes more available when you center, when you come into the present moment. That's the whole point, really, is essentially taking this relatively brief amount of time. Centering does not take long to be able to create that space for yourself that you may need in order to do the next appropriate step, make the next perfect move, right? What's dropping in at the moment is just how revolutionary it would be if this was something that was just ingrained in all of humanity. And maybe on some level it is, maybe on some level it is a very basic thing to do, but we aren't taught it. We certainly aren't encouraged to do that most of the time, to just take a moment. And sometimes when we are, it really helps. It really is great to, we have these different things throughout this culture and probably every culture that is like, count to 10. Well, that's a way to center. Okay, you're physically having to either count out loud or at the very least focus on counting from 1 to 10, which inevitably brings you into that centered space, that present moment. So whatever that modality or method is where you are, that phrase that helps you to center, use that or make one up on your own that works for you, because it is in that moment that we can better sink in and By that, I mean SINK and SYNC, sink into ourselves and our knowing. That knowing that is deep within us, and that knowing that comes from trusted outer higher level sources. And so let's just tune in here and see what else, if anything, drops in on this topic of centering. It's interesting because what's coming in right now is that this is the information I'm hearing right now is this is a hardwired thing that humans are able to do. We're hardwired to do it. And many of our cultures, especially here in the so-called West, are almost maybe not purposefully built to pull us out of this hardwired tool, but that's the result. Right? These things that we have now, these phones, these screens, the way that we set up our society, the way that we don't really spend so much time focusing on how to trust ourselves, how to trust our own eyes, our own feelings, our own logic, our own reasoning. And yeah, even our own bodies. Our bodies give us information all the time. And it's almost like our society has been set up to disconnect us from all of these things. And maybe some of that is intentional. Maybe most of it isn't intentional. It's just what happened over the course of history, over the course of these last 100-ish years, 150, 200, but who really knows? If I wasn't around 200 years ago, I don't know how it was, And if I had an incarnation back then, I don't remember it right now. But, recently, it's almost a shame that we don't prioritize teaching our children, teaching ourselves to trust in what we are feeling, knowing, reasoning, seeing, hearing, using our senses to actually trust what our experience of any given thing is, okay? And this is what's dropping in right now. So, we're being given this information that this centering technique or becoming present is hardwired into us as humans, and thus it can be returned to fairly easily, they're saying. You just need to give it that space away from all of these other external and artificial stimuli that surrounds us every day. And they want me to key in on the word artificial, a very interesting term that is being used widely to talk about AI right now. And I'm not going to go into AI. I'm, not an expert on that at all, even a little bit. But the word artificial, they want me to highlight right here, because when we are centering, when we take these 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 30 seconds, dare I say a minute, to come into the present moment with yourself in the center, that is not artificial. That is real. That is helping you to reconnect to the very essence of what and who you are, and connect you with the information that we are all hardwired and capable of accessing, should we take that time to do so. And yeah, there's a lot of distractions. I'll speak for myself right now. I got off all social media about 2.5 years ago. Don't regret it at all. But you know what? I have been scrolling on, I guess now it's the X app, too much lately. That's my thing right now. That's how I'm kind of staying with one toe in this material world, just to kind of see I was going to say craziness, see the chaos, but maybe I shouldn't put those terms on it, right? That seems a little negative, and I don't need to be negative about what's happening in the world, because essentially and honestly, and when I do center myself, I think everything is perfect. But that's if you want to call it a vice, or if you want to call it my distraction, that's my distraction right now. And we all have those, and a lot of us have many of those things, okay? So how do we reprogram ourselves? How do we hack ourselves so that this coming back to center, coming back within ourselves to access this living, real truth, this living, real feeling of being present, being centered, that is not artificial, that is not on a screen, that's not something that someone else is showing us or someone else filtered and created to tell us how this works, or someone else's agenda for how we should think about a thing, right? And that's where this pretty simple practice, however you decide to go about it, comes in, and where it becomes important. How do we bring coming into ourselves back into the priority and lay aside these distractions so that we can actually get to the core of how we feel about something, how we experience something, how we see and reason and use our own logic to determine the next best move in any given moment. And so, let's see if anything else drops in at the moment. They just want me to do a touch more on reaction and reactivity. Creating this space really creates better outcomes for yourself and probably those around you. Even creating a little bit of space in between a stimuli and reacting to something can help you make the higher consciousness choice, or can at least take you out of any kind of heated, reactive, or past, present, future emotional response, to give it some space before moving forward with the best foot forward. And for myself, I've definitely been trying to take to heart the thought that if you are reactive, don't respond. And it's been getting easier with practice to, if I'm feeling reactive, because come on, we all know with a little bit of presence of mind, we all know if we're feeling reactive to something. It might show up differently for different people, but it's fairly, widespread similar reactions. You can feel when you're reactive to something. And if you're feeling like that, maybe you wait to respond until you don't feel like that. And they're saying this is when ego comes in a lot, because the ego wants to react, right? The ego wants to get a word in. The ego wants to be right. The ego wants to put someone in their place. The ego wants to control. The ego wants to have the power. The ego wants to be noticed and have the first response, or the best response, or the funniest response, or the most outrageous response, or be the victim, The ego wants to be seen as being hurt. The ego wants attention. Okay? And this is all related to centering and this practice of becoming present, because all of these reactive impulses, these reactive urges that we all have, because we are human, we all have this, right? We all have these impulses, urges, and wants to react in specific ways, mostly because of the ego. And our souls, which is what we really are when we are not in these human bodies, our souls don't need the ego, and our souls supersede the ego. Therefore, our souls can rise above and are, in fact, above and can overcome and override the impulses of our lower physical human body and its ego. And centering can help with this by creating that moment, creating that space, creating that time. And even if the centering has nothing to do with reacting to something, it can and maybe should be done more often. Find yourself in the middle of doing something or thinking something, especially if it's stressing you out, especially if it's something that is disrupting you or throwing you off or just keeping you from being at your best and highest self. That is the moment to center. Or before speaking, or before going into work, or before having an important conversation with a friend, a family, a beloved community member, a frenemy, any kind of thing. Centering is a really beautiful and helpful thing to do before going into something, anything, whether it's important or like seemingly quote unquote important, or even if it's not. You know, maybe you take that moment between work and walking in your house. Maybe you take that moment before you're eating dinner so you can be present with your meal. You can have that space for gratitude for either the people you're with or the food you're about to ingest or whatever. Taking these moments and becoming present. And over time, you might be interested and curious to see how that evolves you and how that moves you over time. How that helps to shift your mindset over time. And so we've covered the most important things that I wanted to touch on today. There is no one way to center. We talked about focusing on your breath, a very simple way to do that. We talked about moving backward and forward and literally kind of finding your center, finding your balance with your body. We talked about counting to 10. That's such a, one that's used over and over in our culture, things like that. And there are so many other ways, and maybe there's a way that you used in your family growing up, or you use with your family now, or you've heard in popular culture, or you want to make up your own way. But maybe use this tool. It might be really beneficial to your life. It doesn't have to take long. It doesn't have to take long at all. And we might really need it as a species moving forward into these uncertain times. And they're just popping in here to say it's interesting that they are uncertain for us, because they are on this human level, on this human physical egoic level. They are uncertain. And then on this higher level, our souls absolutely understand and signed up for what is happening right now on our planet. Even though our physical incarnation forgets, we don't know what this is going to look like on this level, our souls absolutely understand what we're doing, the direction it's going, how it's benefiting not just our planet, but this galaxy, other galaxies. All of it's connected. What we do here is felt in other galaxies. That's quite a statement. But it's all connected, so why not become as present and mindful on some level and centered within ourselves as we can to help this process play out? You know, first and foremost for you, for your immediate self, health, and well-being, but also why not for each other and for our families and communities and the world? Why not take this moment and take this space to really tune in and get a good sense of your center so that you can understand what is true, so that you can get the information that you need, that you already know on some level, your soul already knows. Take this time and see how it helps you. I'm going to leave it there for today. I also wanted to just remind everyone that ever since we had our 5th anniversary of the podcast in May, I have added some fun, exclusive Let's Get Metaphysical podcast merch on our Patreon. So if you're interested in mugs or in tote bags or t-shirts, even sweatshirts, for our little podcast we have here, go to patreon.com/letsgetmeta and see about becoming a patron angel of the podcast for however long you would like to grab your merch from that. As always, thank you so much for listening. Stay positive, stay safe, and stay meta.
The Let's Get Metaphysical podcast is an Up, and Awaken production and is produced and hosted by Renata Maniaci. Our intention is to raise the vibration of the planet by sharing, validating, and normalizing spiritual and metaphysical experiences. If you are ready to raise your vibration, you might enjoy our free Let's Get Meta Master Clearing. To receive the Master Clearing or to learn more about the podcast, visit letsgetmeta.com. The Let's Get Meta podcast is inspired by angels and supported by angels. If you would like to be a patron angel to the podcast, visit patreon.com/letsgetmeta. Thank you for listening. Stay meta.
Let's get meta.
Metaphysical.
Let's get meta.
Metaphysical.
Let's get meta.
Metaphysical.
Let's get meta.
Metaphysical.